not that much more. A little more than half will be in the lecture. Okay. Close to 50-50, 55-45. Okay, any questions about the exam or the final exam? No? All right, so let's go ahead and finish up discuss tonight's material. We finish off the semester talking about the eye and the ear, okay? Now the eye, of course, we all know is where our photoreceptors, which are the receptors for light, are occurring, right? And of course, our sense of vision, what we visualize, comes from light waves, okay, that enter our eye. So our brain then takes that light information that our eyes receive and then interprets that image, okay? So in this picture, I guess what I'm kind of demonstrating is sometimes, your brain does interpret the light images that get to your brain, right? And of course, if your brain is in a state of disorientation or whatever, not working properly, it can actually interpret true visual, what is truly the visual image, your brain can interpret it as being different, I guess. As we all know, very well known, alcohol, of course, can impair someone's interpretation of things sometimes, okay? Okay, so when we talk about the eye, okay, there is a transparent membrane that is under our eyelids and goes over the surface of the eye, and that's called the conjunctiva, okay? It's a transparent membrane, helps lubricate and protect the eye. There's a lacrimal gland, as you can see here, on the superior lateral portion of the orbit. And of course, a lacrimal gland makes tears, and these tears, it goes through ducts in the eye, and then from there, there's a lacrimal duct at the medial side of the orbit that's going to drain down into the nasal cavity. Remember the lacrimal bone had that small hole in it? That was the lacrimal opening into the lacrimal duct, right? So that's why, again, when you cry, some of the tears, of course, come out of the eye, but of course, some of it's going to go through the lacrimal duct into the nasal cavity, and that's why you start getting a runny, sniffling, that kind of stuff, nose when you cry. Okay, the eyeball itself is a hollow sphere, okay, slightly irregular, it's not perfectly round. Inside the hollow cavity, of course, it's filled with fluid, which we'll talk a little bit later, called the aqueous and vitreous humor. Okay, the lens, which is this structure, actually separates the inside of the eyeball to an anterior, of course, in front of it segment, and behind it, the posterior segment. Okay. Now, when you look at the eyeball itself, the wall of the eyeball, okay, so it's going from here to here, right? That's the wall of the eyeball, okay? You can see there's three major layers. You can see a white, a red, and a yellow, okay? The most outer layer, the most superficial layer, is called the fibrous tunic. So that's this white layer going all the way around here, okay? That's a fibrous tunic. So the fibrous tunic is made up of the sclera and the cornea. So the sclera is this part here. So it starts from here, goes to about here. The cornea is the anterior part right here. And of course, this again is all sclera, okay? So the sclera is basically, if you look at somebody's eye, okay, the whites of the eye, that's the sclera, okay? And of course, that's where our muscles that move the eyeball attach to the sclera, okay? The cornea is just this portion here of the fibrous tunic, okay? And that's where light, bless you, initially enters the eyeball, is through the cornea. Okay, so that's the first layer, the most outer layer, right? Sclera, and then cornea in the front, okay? Then the next layer, deep to it, is called the vascular tunic, okay? So that's the red layer we see here. So if you see here, there's actually three structures that make up the vascular tunic: the choroid, the ciliary body, and the iris. So if you start in the back here, this choroid goes from here to about here. Okay? Bless you. Then the ciliary body goes from about here to here. Okay? And then the most anterior portion from here to here is the iris. Okay? So again, choroid, and then here to here is the ciliary body, bless you, and then here to here is the iris. Okay? The choroid, its main function is that it supplies blood to the wall of the eyeball. Okay? There's a lot of blood vessels and stuff in it. The ciliary body, so that's this portion from here to here, it has a lot of smooth muscle in it, and what happens is there are little strings, which they do call ligaments, although technically we say ligaments connects what? Bone to bone, right? So this, of course, would be the exception to that rule, okay, where these little strings are called ligaments as well. And they, of course, connect the ciliary body to the lens. Okay, so they help anchor the lens and hold the lens in place. Okay? And then finally, the iris is this portion here, and that's the colored part of your eye. Okay, so if someone has hazel eyes, blue eyes, brown eyes, the colored pigment is in the iris area. Okay? And of course, there's an opening in the middle of the iris. Of course, that's the pupil. Okay? Now, the iris itself, not only does it have a lot of colored pigment, gives your eye its color, but it's got a lot of smooth muscle in it. Okay? And remember, we talked about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, right? The sympathetic nervous system can actually send nerves to the iris and cause certain muscles to contract, which does what to the pupil? Dilate. So if you look at this picture here, this is the normal pupil, let's say, okay? And you can see there's some, the blue is, of course, the iris, right? So you can see the smooth muscles in the iris. Some of it is a circular muscle around it, and then you've got these more straight muscles up here. Those are both smooth muscles, okay? So, of course, when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, so like I said, someone points a gun at your head, a lot of sympathetic activity goes out, goes through nerves, and goes to the iris, and it causes which muscles to contract? The circular one or these more linear ones? The linear ones, right? Because you can imagine if the linear ones shorten, then the pupil gets larger, right? Of course, the parasympathetic would be the opposite, right? So if you're, if you send out a lot of parasympathetic signals, and of course it would go out through what nerves? Which?
Ocular.
Right, okay. You just need to know it would be one of which ones. 3, 7, or 9, right? Remember, there's a smooth muscle in the head and neck area, right? Parasympathetic nervous system can innervate any smooth muscle in the head and neck area through one of those nerves, 3, 7, or 9. It's really 3, but you don't need to know the details of that, okay? Just need to know it's one of those 3, okay? So, of course, the first neuron in the parasympathetic nervous system that would send the messages to here is located where? Brainstem, okay? So that nerve, in this case the oculomotor nerve, will send fibers or its axons to innervate which muscles? The circular or the linear ones? For parasympathetic. Circular ones, right? So when this muscle contracts, what's the pupil do? Constricts, right? Just like the smooth muscle in the wall of the blood vessel, right? We said when that muscle contracts, the blood vessel does what? Constricts, right? So same thing with this muscle, right? If it contracts, it constricts the pupil, makes it smaller. Okay? All right, so we've talked about the fibrous tunic, which we said in the back was what? Sclera, and in the front it's cornea. Then we talked deep to that is the vascular tunic. We said the structure in the back of the vascular tunic is what? Choroid. The middle one here, ciliary body, and then anteriorly iris, right? And of course the hole in the middle of the iris is the pupil. So remember, the pupil, the size of the pupil is dictated by the iris, right? Okay. So what structure controls the amount of light that enters the eye? What controls the amount of light that can enter in here? Iris, right? Because light has to enter the eye through the pupil, right? And of course, what controls the size of the pupil is the iris, right? So if your pupil is very dilated, of course, a lot more light can get into your eye. If your pupil is very constricted, very little light gets in your eye. So if you notice, if you walk into a very bright room, what does your pupil do? It constricts, right? Because there's too much light, so it wants to lessen the amount of light that gets into your eye. If you go into a dark room, what does your eye dilates, right? Because you want to try to get more light into your eye. So of course, the iris, of course, controls the size of the pupil, which in turn controls the amount of light that gets into the eyeball. Make sense? Okay. All right. So we've talked about the first two layers. Now let's talk about the deepest layer. That's the yellow one here. Okay. Goes from here to here. This is known as our sensory tunic. It's a sensory tunic because this is where the sense of where you receive the light information, the receptors for that sense. Talk about the five senses, right? The sense of vision here. The receptors for the sense of vision is located in this layer. That's why it's a sensory tunic, okay? And that is primarily made up of the retina, okay? So all this yellow stuff here is the retina. So the retina contains the photoreceptors, and those are, again, the receptors that capture and the light energy that enters your eye, okay? What are the two photoreceptors in our eye called? Anybody know? Rods and cones, okay? So the rods and cones, we'll talk about in a little bit. The rods and cones, as you can see, responds to more dim light, whereas cones respond more to bright light, okay? And the rods, so basically the rods are involved in more your peripheral vision, whereas the cones are responding more to the specific object that you're focusing on, okay? So if you're looking at a specific object, the visual information from that object is actually being received by the cones. If it's just your general peripheral vision, it's receiving, the rods are the ones that receive that information, okay? So, there's an area on the retina called the fovea centralis, and this is where the greatest concentration of cones are located, okay? So when you're staring at an object and you're getting visual information of a specific object, the light rays that come off that object should be focused onto the fovea centralis, because that's where the greatest concentration of cones are. So these are the photoreceptors that receive very detailed light information, okay? Whereas the rods, again, these don't receive detailed light information. It's more general background information, okay? So let's go into the retina a little bit more detail here, okay? So remember, the retina was on that picture of the eyeball we just showed was that yellow layer, right? Okay. So if you look at it up close, the retina is like from here to here, okay? So this is all within the retina, that yellow layer there. So what happens is, okay, this is the back of the eyeball, so that means the front of the eyeball is here. So as light comes in this direction, so it'll be coming in this direction, light's gonna go through, and then the rods and cones are these guys, the purple and yellow ones, okay? They're gonna receive that light waves, okay? So what they do is once they receive that light information, they're gonna send that information through impulses or depolarizations, action potentials, right? They're gonna go through its axons and they're gonna send it to these cells, which then send them to these cells. These cells are called ganglion cells, and you can see how their axons come out of their cell bodies. And those axons, actually all from those ganglion cells, all come out of a nerve here, right? And what nerve is this? Optic nerve, right? Okay? So the optic nerve is made up of axons.